We turn to a gospel reading from the Gospel of Mark. As I said a couple weeks ago, lectionary year B is a lot of it is about Mark, and so we'll kind of stick with Mark whenever possible. And sometimes, if the lectionary has us on something else, we might be with Mark anyway, because it is such a powerful account of Jesus' life and what he means to us. This is the first chapter of Mark, starting at the 9th verse, just 9 to 12. Listen now for a word from God. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased." And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I think I've told you before, after my freshman year in college, I got a job at the John Knox Center in East Tennessee, Kingston, Tennessee. And it was a Presbyterian church camp. And my advice to all college students and to high school students is get a job at a Presbyterian church camp. It is awesome. Get to talk about God every day. You get to teach from the Bible. Tater tots are served often. And maybe this applies more to boys than girls, I'm not sure. Bathing is optional. So it was a great summer for me. I loved it. At our camp, we had a high ropes course, which, if you're unfamiliar with what ropes courses are, you wear a climbing harness with a climbing rope attached way up high in the trees through a pulley, and it comes down to 2 or 3 people in your team whose job it is to keep you from falling to your death. And so you perform, they called them events or challenges. Things like climb up a tree 35 feet into the air and walk across a wobbly telephone pole. Maybe that's where you're at. Other people, it's a challenge just to kind of climb halfway up the tree and then come back down. But wherever your comfort zone is, they want you to kind of push beyond, right? And there were, 65-foot elements where I mentioned before, kind of leaping to your death, and others that are 35 feet and stuff. But the one that really messed with your head the most was called the trapeze. It was only about 25 feet up, so it didn't seem very, very tall or anything, and very high. And all you did was you climb up to a platform, and then you jump and grab a trapeze. It just seemed kind of like nothing. Until the camp director told me that I needed to do it. And then it started to work on me, because you had to put on a body harness with the rope in the back. And then they asked, what is your goal, Michael? And I was thinking to myself, my goal is to not die. But you can't say that. So I said something lame like, to catch the trapeze. And they said, and what can we do to support you in this goal? And I thought, please don't kill me. But you can't say that. And so you say something like, please pay attention to me while I'm doing this event or something. And then all right. So I headed off to the tree. And I climbed up the tree and began a serious courtship with this tree. This is my friend, the tree. And I got to the top, to the platform, and no kidding, the platform was about the size of a postage stamp. So when I got up there, I was literally a tree hugger, literally. And that's when my team said, you have to turn around, you have to face the trapeze. And so I had to work out how I could continue hugging the tree and also be facing the trapeze. And so I kind of did a weird reverse hug. And they said, no, you have to put your hands up to be ready. And that was very difficult to let go of that tree, and I did. I put my hands up, and that's when I realized that I was not holding on to anything. And I think the tree was hurt by that. The feelings were hurt, because that's when the tree started to sway, just a little bit. And but I kept my hands up. And then they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to count to 3. We're going to count 1, 2, 3, jump. And you're going to count with us, and then you jump and catch the trapeze. And I thought, oh, I don't think so. But we did. We counted 1, and I thought, this is a truly terrible idea. 2, and my life flashed before my eyes. I was only 19, so it flashed twice. 3, I cannot believe I'm doing this. And then we all said, jump. And my legs were committed, and they jumped. The rest of me was not so sure. And my hands were very certain that I was going to die. And they had their little bucket list of all the things they wanted to do, all the sweat they wanted to sweat that they couldn't sweat. And so they just let it all out. And when I grabbed that trapeze, I slipped. And doing, my belay team on the ground, they got me. And I was hanging there. And I thought, people don't really like to get out of their comfort zones, including me. I'm not a big fan. As I was slowly lowered to the ground from the trapeze. Nobody likes getting out of their comfort zones, but it's a common experience we all have, being pushed beyond what's comfortable, being pushed beyond our comfort zones. You think of the young broker sitting in front of a phone book with all those cold calls he or she has to make. They just have to pick up the phone and start talking and build a career for themselves. Think about the young student who really wants to ask the girl to the dance, but really doesn't. We're pushed out of our comfort zones all the time. It happens to pastors. Maybe some wouldn't admit it. I'll admit it. I don't like to be pushed out of my comfort zone. A couple weeks ago, I got into the office and Gwenna told me that I had a message, and I'm going to change the name to protect the innocent. Miss Pluto called, Gwenna said. Miss Pluto called, and she says, you're to have tea with her today at 2 o'clock. And there were a couple things wrong with that in my mind. First of all, I didn't know Miss Pluto. I had never met her. And second of all, I don't like being told what to do. And, that's a common trait of Presbyterians. You can tell a Presbyterian what to do, and they won't do it. So I did not want to do it. But I'm trying to learn obedience. And so I thought, I was really mad on the walk from my office, or the church office to my office, but I decided I would call Miss Pluto and figure out what's going on with this. Because I didn't like being told what to do, and I didn't know who she was. So I grabbed the phone, and I called, and I asked about this politely, and she was much softer on the phone, and would I come to tea at 2 o'clock? And I said, well, that sort of depends. Who are you? And it turned out that we had someone in common. She had attended a funeral of a beloved church member, and so that seemed okay. It seemed a little bit safer then to walk into a situation where I didn't know what I was getting into. So I agreed. And at 2 o'clock, I pulled up into her driveway, and I assume it was her. She was standing on the porch sweeping, and I went inside, and that's when I saw the place. Now, you have all seen a Hallmark store before, right? So put that in your mind. And let's imagine that Hallmark store met an antique store, and they fell in love, and they had a whirlwind courtship. Their parents were against it, but they got married. They bought a 3-bedroom house. And eventually they had a child. This child of the Hallmark store and the antique store was Miss Pluto's house. Every card she had ever received was taped somewhere inside the room I was standing in. Christmas cards, birthday cards, St. Patrick's Day cards, Valentine's Day cards, Columbus Day cards, and Flag Day cards were all in this place. I looked and I saw an extensive set of salt and pepper shakers, none of which were on the table. And I believe I made out in the corner a glass front display that had, I estimated, at least $15,000 worth of Beanie Babies. All there looking at me with their little beanie faces. And that's when I prayed that prayer that we sometimes pray, Jesus Christ, Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world, what have you gotten me into? But it was okay because she just wanted to talk a little bit about the Bible. She attended a Bible study earlier in the week and they had a question, and so it ended up being okay. But I'm just reminded that we all get pushed outside our comfort zone, but really nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. And I think that's what's happening in our lesson from Mark. Mark begins that this is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And John the Baptist comes on the scene to make us think of the prophets, the ones who prepare the way for the Messiah. And John baptizes Jesus, and he hears the voice, "This is my beloved, the one in whom I am well pleased." The Spirit descends on Jesus, and then Mark says, immediately the Spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness. Immediately drives him into the wilderness. The first time I read verse 12, I had to stop. It was so interesting to me that the Spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness. And that word, the Greek word that Mark uses for drives, is the same word that he uses when Jesus is driving out evil spirits. Jesus drives out evil spirits and heals people, and it's the same word. So just as Jesus drives out evil spirits, so the Holy Spirit is driving Jesus into the wilderness. Did Jesus want to be driven into the wilderness? Did he want to be driven outside of his comfort zone? He was with John the Baptist, who some say was his cousin. He was with disciples. They were having a good time, but he's pushed by the Holy Spirit beyond that circle of comfort into the wilderness. Maybe he didn't want to go, but he went. The wilderness, for the readers of Mark, the early readers of Mark, would have made them think of the wilderness that the Israelites spent 40 years in. 40 years in the wilderness, trying to figure out what it means to be the people of God, waiting to be led into the promised land. The early church, because of Mark's account, thought of the wilderness as a place of testing. So later, when St. Anthony is written about, St. Anthony goes into the wilderness to be tested by demons. The wilderness is a place of testing. But we sort of get to figure out for us what the wilderness is all about. Is the wilderness a place of testing? Is the wilderness a place to wonder and wander? Is it a place of confusion? Is the wilderness for us a place of fulfillment and hope? Could the wilderness be a place where nothing gets in the way of our relationship with God? None of the trappings of our lives get in the way. Could that be what the wilderness is for us? Or maybe the wilderness is simply a place we don't want to go, but a place where we need to go. We have to be pushed into the wilderness. We don't want to go there naturally. We'd rather go to the mall, but the Spirit drives us into the wilderness. For Operation Joy a couple weeks ago, we gave all the parents, Elizabeth and I gave all the parents an article about how to raise nice kids, I think it said, or 5 tips on how you can raise nice kids. And somewhere in the title or in the subtitle, it said something about a Harvard psychologist. So if the Harvard psychologist says it, it's great. But there was one piece in there that was really interesting about expanding our circle of concern. One of the ways to raise nice kids or be nice ourselves is to figure out what is our circle of concern and how can we expand it. And as I thought about that circle, the circle of concern, and I thought about that circle of comfort we like to stay in, it occurred to me that sometimes if we expand our circle of concern, we have to leave our circle of comfort. If we expand our circle of concern, we leave our circle of comfort, and that is not something we like to do. We've been having a lot of more groups meeting in the church, NA groups and AA groups meeting here. Our clothing closet has gone very well in 2014 and even now. We've been inviting other people in, and that's been a little nerve-wracking at times. And as we think about ways we can expand our circle of concern and leave the comfort of our building and help those in our community, that'll also be nerve-wracking and anxiety-producing. But the good news of the gospel is that as we are pushed into the wilderness, whatever the wilderness means for us, Jesus is already there. When we're pushed into the wilderness, we find Christ in the wilderness, His presence, His comfort. A few years ago, I took, and some will remember this, we took the youth group on a little mini mission trip to Kansas City, to the Kansas City Rescue Mission. I had learned about them a little bit, and I was impressed with their program, and so we went together. And I think the youth were a little bit concerned, some members more than others, about what it would be like to serve food to homeless men and kind of be in that environment. And then when I told them that they had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning on Saturday to do it, there was more concern about that. Now, Liam had just been born, so the idea for me that I could sleep from midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning uninterrupted, that was like spring break. I was ready. Let's do it. Let's get up at 4. The youth were a little bit harder to motivate. Well, we got up and we got to the rescue mission, and we started to cook breakfast at about 4:30 for the men that were sleeping there that night that needed to get up and get out to jobs and things. And then it turned out that after that first breakfast, we needed to get back in the kitchen to cook a second breakfast, sort of like hobbits. Cook a second breakfast for the men that were on the street, and they were going to come in. And so we cooked the breakfast, and I think we got to eat with them for that second breakfast. And I could feel like the walls were still up, the walls of us and them, and they're homeless. And so there was some of that. But after breakfast, we began to do some work around the place, move boxes, unload trucks, move clothing. And we worked with them and exchanged smiles and began to learn faces and names and to really see them as people. And I felt, at least for me, and the other youth might agree or not, but I felt that those walls started to kind of come down, those barriers between us and them, as we began to see their faces and to know them. And I think when we saw them, we began to see the face of Christ, to see the face of Christ in the other, in the stranger, in the one that we thought was so different. I found Christ in the wilderness. I think we all found Christ in the wilderness. Now, Monday was Martin Luther King Day. And as I think about Martin Luther King, and I think about what it means to be pushed into the wilderness, there was one quote that came to mind from a speech he gave the night before he was assassinated. And I'll read it to you. It's a very well-known quote, and so because of the amazing gift of memory, you will hear his voice in your head as I read this quote to you. Like anybody, I would like to live